informative and hopefully inspiring presentation today. So how it's going to work, we're going to go till about 2 o'clock is the plan. We have about an hour of presentation, and then I want to have about a half hour of Q&A at the end. So as I'm talking and questions are coming up, or whatever is being stimulated in your mind and you want to ask about it at the end, please feel free to. So save those for the end. So today's presentation is the first in a diverse series of what we are calling venture intensives. Opportunities to learn more about a specific topic related to mental health and social issues and its connection with our faith. These presentations are scheduled to happen about once a month, and everyone is always invited to attend. To kick this off, we are going to talk about relationships today, and one of the biggest barriers to healthy relationships, which are the unhealed wounds and trauma from the past that keep showing up in our present. Our focus today is on briefly reviewing what trauma is and is not, how it may show up in our relationships, and what are our options for addressing it, either by working through it with our loved one, or by knowing when to step out and let the professionals step in. This discussion today will be lightly overviewing trauma, but will not be a comprehensive or detailed discussion on trauma and mental health due to time constraints. I would love to come back at another time and talk in more detail about trauma, different aspects on it. So put a pin in that. We may do that at a different time. But today the goal is to walk away with a broad framework for our challenging relationships, whether they are with children, friends, coworkers, spouses, parents. So today's focus is on what do I do with that person in my life that we're hitting up against a wall. So, by the way, actually I should introduce my husband, Tom.
Hi,
He
Tom.
is helping me out today. Okay, so we've all been through things, but not everything is trauma. Pain and disappointment, rejection, sadness, fury, confusion, these are all part of normal things in relationships at times. It's not the presence of pain that signals the dysfunction we're going to be talking about today. It's the patterned presence of pain, of hurt, and the inability to grow or move through that. We get stuck. Those two pieces let us know that we're in over our head. You may need some additional support here. It's the pain without a solution, repeated cycles, irrational words and behaviors, efforts to improve the relationship that feel absolutely futile, confusion. We may wonder in these relationships if we are going crazy or if they are. We love them, but we may begin to wonder if our love is not enough. We are up against something else entirely. There's a third party in the relationship that's distorting and stunting, hindering and harming. And we find ourselves constantly sidestepping to avoid a mine that may explode at any point in our interactions with our loved one. This, my friends, is the crazy making. So what is trauma? Trauma can be most simply understood as any experience in which an overwhelming sense of danger or deprivation causes us to feel as if our very survival is on the line. When a person is experiencing a traumatic event, the body shuts down functions that are not necessary for survival in that moment, and instead will kickstart automatic responses that will help us get through that moment. So this is going to be adrenaline and cortisol. We get tunnel vision as we're trying to focus in on only the most important stimuli in that moment. We're going to disregard other things that are happening. We get tachycardia, our heart is beating profusely. That's a trauma response. And in that moment, it's useful, it may save your life. However, for some people, that trauma response doesn't stop when the event stops. It continues. Anxiety, toxic stress, and post-traumatic stress disorder may follow as the brain and body work together to keep the memory and the event current in its mind in order to self-protect from further pain. It serves a purpose. If I can keep that memory right there, and those sensations, the stimuli, the environment, all those pieces of information current, then I can prepare and protect against it happening again. The body isn't interested in processing that event and putting it behind it into long-term memory storage, because then it might not be prepared. So it keeps it current. So that's a key point I want you to remember. Okay, so we've got a little video here that I think explains PTSD pretty good, and then after that video, we'll keep talking. Should we turn that light on?
Wait. I'm trying to figure out how to get the audio to.
Okay.
Was Mark still here? Mark? I thought it was on there. I just need you standing next to me.
Happy to be your support, your emotional support.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, can happen to anyone who experiences or sees a traumatic event unfold. When these events happen, your emotions trigger changes in your brain that leave a lasting impression on how you feel, how you respond to those feelings, and how you move through the world around you. Here are 4 common signs of PTSD. 1. Avoidance. Having PTSD is a lot like being on autopilot. As much as you try to know.
Oh, yeah.
Navigate life's daily obstacles, you might find yourself avoiding people, places, situations, and events that trigger your feelings or remind you of your original trauma. This happens because your brain wants to keep your body safe. For example, if you've been in a car accident and feel anxious about getting behind the wheel, you may choose to walk or take public transportation instead. 2. Being on edge. Sometimes, if you have PTSD, you may feel differently about things you used to love or enjoy doing, especially if it causes you to recall your original trauma. And these feelings of anxiety can surface unexpectedly and without warning. For instance, if you were robbed on a sunny afternoon, warm weather days might cause anxiety and discomfort. 3. Negative thoughts and feelings. Sadness, anger, and distrust are all heavy, difficult emotions to manage on our own. Add in the constant reminder of a traumatic event, and it's no wonder why many people with PTSD may turn to substance use or other harmful mechanisms to drown out the pain. While these coping strategies may help in the short run, they can perpetuate a vicious cycle of negative emotions and intrusive thoughts. 4. Retriggering trauma. There's no time limit on trauma, and healing isn't linear. PTSD can flare up weeks, months, or even years later, and it can happen in the form of flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive thoughts that you can't shake off. For example, if a loved one died unexpectedly, but years later you hear a song that reminds you of them, you may re-experience the emotions and physical symptoms associated with grief, anxiety, and sadness. It's important to remember that you are not alone in your battle with PTSD, and you're not defined by the trauma that has happened to you. If you experience any of these warning signs, or you're concerned for your mental health, talk to your healthcare provider about possible treatments for PTSD.
Okay. Turn the light on. Or do you want the light on? We have no light
I'm indifferent.
I like it on.
on. Okay.
Be better for the video, probably.
So, that gave us a little overview of PTSD, which your loved one may be experiencing. This kind of helps us get inside the mind and the feelings of that person who's been through some pretty hard things and may still be kind of trapped in that in the present. So I'm going to look at trauma in different life stages really briefly. So trauma in children. Trauma in children, again, if we're looking at it through the lens of the brain and body trying to keep us safe and cope and self-protect and survive, these symptoms make sense. One caveat I want to say, though, is that these are not exclusive to trauma. These are also very normal experiences in children as we, at different times. So I want to emphasize it's the pattern presence of it, and we're stagnating. We can't grow and learn. So if those two things are happening in conjunction with this, then I would say maybe we need to look a little further into what's the brain doing in that moment. So we have separation from parents or caregivers that feels really threatening. The kid feels as if it's survival's on the line. Crying or screaming a lot for no reason. We can't console them, can't really understand what's going on. Nightmares, acting out behaviors. So these are all in the little children, right? They can't verbalize and have a great discussion with us about what's going on, so their body's going to express it for them. Elementary school children, so ages 6 to 12, we might see a little more anxiety or fear. Their emotions are starting to develop a little more, and we're going to see guilt and shame coming through. Hard time concentrating is really a key symptom. Difficulty sleeping, acting out behaviors. Again, these kids are trying to express or work through what's going on inside of them that they don't understand and get through that moment. Next. Teenagers. So in teenagers, we become more abstract in our thinking. And so those emotions feel heavier, they feel more complex. And if we've had trauma before being a teenager, we've had years to reinforce this sense of I'm not safe, I'm alone, those kinds of messages. And so it can come out in different ways. We've got really strong emotions, really intense sadness, anger, anxiety, guilt, overreacting to minor irritations, disturbed sleeping patterns. We notice that has showed up in every life stage. We've got sleeping problems. The brain is not letting us fully relax or go offline at night. Difficulties with short-term memory, concentration, problem solving. It's like they're just not in that present moment with us. We're telling them something and it's not connecting. Again, I want to kind of put that pause, and also, these are also normal teenage symptoms at times, right? I've got 2 teenagers. But it's repetitive. It's not just the exception. This is now the norm. Okay, we'll keep going. Next one. And then in adults. In adults, we have a lot of those symptoms, as well as we're going to see loss of interest in previous activities, feelings of social isolation. This might now become depression, hopelessness. I don't see a path forward for myself. Risky, reckless, or destructive behavior. We're using a lot of substances. We're coping any way we can. We have our classic hypervigilance symptoms, being easily startled, can't handle a lot of noise, can't handle a lot of stimuli, feeling tense, on guard, on edge. We're kind of waiting for something to happen, difficulty concentrating, there it is again, and then our sleep issues, among many other symptoms. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a sec. We just went through a nice little overview of trauma and kind of what it looks like. I want you to think about that person in your life. Maybe it's a coworker, a child, a spouse, close friend, a parent. Do some of these symptoms make sense? Kind of making some of those connections? Or maybe, as we're going through this, you're connecting some of that with yourself even. Maybe some of that's relating to you. So just kind of hold on to that connection. And we're going to talk now about what that looks like when we're interacting with our partner, our friends socially, what those trauma responses can look like. Okay, so we have 4 trauma responses. Next. Thank you, dear. So we have the fight response. A person responds aggressively. There's a sense of energy, force. They look like they're the threat in the room. We don't think of them as triggered by trauma or feeling afraid or like their survival's on the line. We look at them and we think, oh, you're the problem, right? However, these people are generally pretty scared, and their heart's racing and they don't know what's going to happen next. And this is the way they're going to try to control their environment, right? Next. Flight. This is a common response. This is the one we most commonly associate with a trauma trigger. Someone's running away. Something happened and we're scared. One thing I want to point out is sometimes people may just kind of look, they may not be able to actually leave, and they might just kind of look panicked and have that wide-eyed look, even though they're kind of stuck there. But their mind is thinking, leave, I don't want to be here. So they may not be able to actually flee, but they want to flee. Next, freeze. So this is where we just shut down, physically, verbally, emotionally. The brain says, I don't know how to get through this moment. The way I'm going to survive is I'm going to just stop existing for a minute. So someone may appear confused. They may appear like they're in shock. They may have a blank look on their face entirely. They, again, are just not there in that moment. They may stand and stare. They may kind of nod at you a little bit like they're listening, but they are not listening. They are not in that moment, right? They won't remember much of the conversation later. This is often misunderstood as not caring. When someone's shut down and we're interacting with them, we're thinking, oh my goodness, you don't care about me. You're not even listening. And sometimes we lean in more. You're not listening. I should probably say more words. I should probably raise my voice a little. I should get energetic because you're not doing anything. You're not responding to me. And that's actually the opposite of what we need to do in that moment. And we'll talk about that. And fawn. This one is, so we kind of talk about fight or flight, and then freeze came along like 15 years ago, and now in the last 10 years we've really understood that fawning is a trauma response. So this is that attempt to charm or influence the threat in order to mitigate the damage. A person may feel they have no power in that moment. The only way I'm going to survive this moment is if I try to regulate you so I can regulate me. So if I attend to the external, if I do some people pleasing, then everything's going to be all right and I will be able to survive in that moment. So it's not people pleasing because I'm really looking at you and caring. It's people pleasing because this is how I'm going to get through the moment. So we call that our fawn response. So although these trauma responses, they look really different, they have two things in common. One is they're all automatic. This person is not asking to do that response in that moment. They're not intentionally saying, I wonder if I should freeze, if I should flee, right? This is just happening. The brain and body say, hey, let's stop thinking for a minute and let's just survive. The second thing in common is that typical functioning is going to cease. When the brain is busy trying to survive, it does not have the resources to attend to normal functions. It's not going to think clearly. It's not going to record memories properly. There's a whole lot of interesting science on why that happens in the brain and why that's a survival mode, is to actually pause memory recording. We're not going to be able to take new information in and certainly not engage in a rational discussion of any kind in that moment. Really important to understand that, because when we're interacting with someone who's in one of these responses, we are not recognizing often how impaired they really are. They are not capable of showing up in our relationship in that moment. They're not who they want to be in that moment. They're not their best selves, and they're not who we need them to be in that moment either. The third party is in the room. So, as we're kind of thinking about these relationships, I'm hoping you're making some connections with, if you can kind of conceptualize that third party in the room with you. It's not necessarily you have the problem or your partner has the problem. It's that there's some old unhealed things that are in the middle here that's confusing your communication and kind of messing things up. And I think that's really helpful. I love that picture. It's like there's a snake. That's about me. It's like there's just this thing in the room with us, and we're not able to be who we need to be in that moment. It's the automatic responses. It's that defensiveness, right? So the enemy is not your loved one. The enemy is their hurtful learned behaviors that have served to protect them in the past. Okay? Okay? So there's a validity to their responses that's really important for us to understand as well. They make sense. Understanding this does not mean condoning. We're not understanding, so we want to do all this wonderful empathy and understanding and being present and saying, okay, get it. Your past is influencing your present. There's a third party in the room. Now what? We seek to understand what's really going on here and put these pieces together so that we can stop blaming ourselves and stop blaming that other person and instead shift our energy to more productive problem solving. What if we could stand shoulder to shoulder with our partner instead of facing one another saying, you're the problem, and we don't really go anywhere? What if we changed our posture and said, there's the problem? And we're shoulder to shoulder, identifying it, talking about it, praying through it, getting the help we need. Now we've got some hope in the room with us. Okay, I gotta put a pitch in here for Tim Fletcher at this point. If you guys have not discovered him, he's a wonderful pastor, counselor, he runs a recovery program. He has like 100 podcasts on complex PTSD and relationships. Complex PTSD and the relationship with ourself. And you can just look him up and he has topic by topic by topic. I guarantee you'll find something that will relate to your situation, and he gives really good counsel on it, really good next steps, and he's very clinical as well, and references a lot of research. So there's my pitch for Tim Fletcher. There he is. Okay. So this may be the question that's coming to mind now as well. Is it trauma or is it just bad behavior? Because they sure can look the same sometimes, right? Especially when we're talking about teenagers. What are we dealing with? Okay. Both are rooted in skill deficit. So they're similar in that we've learned and reinforced maladaptive coping skills. We've reinforced things that are going to get us through that moment or get us an outcome we might want, but are not helping us. So with the trauma, the body is surviving in that moment using whatever means it can. The brain is offline. With bad behavior, poor coping skills have been reinforced over time. So during the trauma response, again, we've got to disconnect from reality, we've got to disconnect from rationality, we can't take new information, and we're not able to move forward in that moment. So that skill building, that accountability, that, hey, knock it off, what's going on, that might need to pause for a minute, because this person's not able to take that in. They can't take instructions. However, with bad behavior, we can talk to them in that moment and say, hey, knock it off, what's going on? I need you to do something different, okay? However, both of these, whether it's a trauma response or it's bad behavior, the person must be held accountable for their behaviors and a challenge and a reinforcement of new skills being learned. It's just that with the trauma response, we're going to do one step first. There's a little bit of a different route, but we're going to get to the same outcome. So go back. So assessing whether someone is in survival mode, like what am I dealing with here, is going to require us to kind of know the person's baseline a little bit ahead of time and a little bit of checking in with them. And it's really unique to each person. There's not really a cookie cutter, like, oh, this is trauma, this is bad behavior. We kind of have to know a little bit about what's going on. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay. Next, thank you. So, take a deep breath. Here's the fun part. Here's where we're going to learn skills for moving us forward. How do we actually live with this now? We've talked about it, we're kind of identifying it. Hopefully you're making connections about maybe what's happening. Hopefully you're getting curious about your relationships. But here's where we're going to now actually advance through that trauma and into something better for ourselves and them. So, safety, boundaries, skill building, and reinforcement is kind of our game plan. Okay, safety. So creating an environment of safety is a vital first step. Trauma is all about perceived danger and self-protection. So the opposite, safety, acts as an antidote to heightened fear, and it's going to lay that groundwork for healing. We have to have that safety first. Now, this is particularly important when we're working with children with trauma. They have to know that you are not a threat. That big, tall, scary person that's towering over them, giving them instructions, sure feels like a threat to them. And so we have to get down on their level. We have to reduce the stimuli. We have to show that we're with them in this moment, that we care about them. Sometimes we're interacting with somebody that might be, 45 years old, but in that moment, when they go to their trauma mode, they feel like they're 8 years old. And so some of those same concepts are going to hold true. We're going to back up. We're going to get down. We're going to reduce our sense of being a threat. One thing I want to make a little comment about also, biologically, why this works is it helps that person. So they've got this hyper-arousal going on. We talked about the heart rate, the cortisol, the adrenaline, right? The body's gearing up for, I gotta survive. We need that to stop. We need the person to stop sending out all that cortisol. We need the heart rate to come down, right? We need to kind of come back to a baseline. So we have this beautiful mechanism in our body called the parasympathetic nervous system. That is the calm down response. And we need to help our loved one access that. We need to help their body say, oh, I need to actually stop and bring things down a notch. And so when we do that ourselves, we help them access that. When we are not stimulated and aroused and putting energy out there, when we do the opposite, we help their brain and body go, oh, wait, I should do that too. Another thing to remember is that we may not understand the trauma response or the trauma trigger for that person. We're just walking along and we're having a conversation and suddenly they're freaking out. And we're confused. And we're thinking, what did I do wrong? What's happening here? It's irrational, right? We may not understand that they saw somebody that triggered them, that they had a sensation that they felt threatened by, it's not clear to us, but it's very clear to them. And so someone who has an association with trauma, in that moment, their survival feels in question. And so we have to trust them in that and be aware of that. And that's kind of that concept of being trauma-informed, is assuming that most people have some kind of trauma in their past, because we don't know. We can't look around and say, you have it or you have it or you don't. We don't know what people have been through. And so we sort of assume in our interactions that somebody has some trauma, and we're going to treat them gently, and we're going to be as safe and as predictable, consistent, and loving as we can be. So that's really what trauma-informed means. It's assuming there's already trauma in the room, and I'm going to proceed as if there is. And if there's not, well then great, we're just a really nice person. Awesome, that was a good interaction. You can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with trauma-informed. Okay, so here's some specifics about safety. 1, be as calm and as non-threatening as possible in the moment. Take a deep breath and take a step back. Okay, that's what we're going to do first. We want to emotionally detach from that person if possible. We will talk in detail about emotional detachment at the end. We will aim for a neutral affect. So sometimes we feel like we want to lean in and make it better. I gotta convince you of something in this moment. I gotta calm you down because you're freaking out. No, we actually need to step back, neutral, hands at our sides, open body language. We're showing that we are not a threat. We want to reduce the stimuli if possible, turn things off, slow things down. We want to model that calm, rational behavior. Maybe we need to use some grounding strategies for ourselves, because when we watch somebody get flooded or disconnect, it's going to invariably affect our emotional state. We need to attend to our emotional state. Take a deep breath, count to 10, detach, okay? We want to keep our words to a minimum. We're not giving them a bunch of instructions. We're not reassuring them. We're just saying, oh, okay, looks like you need some space. I'll just sit here with you. Let me know what you need. It's going to be something really calm and simple like that. And then we want to be consistent with what we say. If we say we're going to sit here with you, and that I care about you, and that you're safe, then we better sit there with them. Sometimes we say these things, but then we get up and leave the room to go check our phone, or we get up and we do something. Well, now we just broke that consistency. So if we say we're going to be with you in that moment, then we're going to be with you. One thing I want to also point out, we know from research in biology that it takes a minimum of 20 minutes for that hyperarousal state to come down, for the parasympathetic nervous system to bring the cortisol down, bring the adrenaline down, slow the heart rate. It takes a minimum of 20 minutes. So just know you need 20 minutes. They're going to need 20 minutes. And we're not going to rush it. One thing I want to point out is we're going to address those rational concerns later. So maybe they just had a tantrum and they threw something and something got broken. And it feels like we want to hold them accountable or fix it or right now we got to deal with this. We don't. We need to do that later. Right now we need to attend to creating a safe environment. We will totally get to that thing that got broken later. We don't forget about it. We don't say, oh, it doesn't matter, you're in trauma response. We're going to hold them accountable, but not in that moment. Never try to argue with someone who is escalating. Don't try to hug or touch them, even if that feels like that'd be really comforting to you. Like, oh, they just need a hug. They probably don't. They need to get grounded and recognize that their environment is safe. If you do lean in too much or try to give them too much information, you may end up furthering the defensive response, right? Because now they're like, somebody's coming at me, or more information is coming at me. I feel really defensive now. You might even get hurt yourself, right? They don't mean to, but they might lash out. They might push you away. They might blow out of the room, right? So we're going to, again, back up, slow down. Physical safety trumps emotional safety. So in that moment, physical safety for yourself is number one. That's what you are responsible to attending to. And number two is that person. And then the third one is, those emotions and some of those pieces. But if you have to choose between physical safety or emotional safety, physical safety, get yourself out of the room. That's more important in that moment. You can always come back and figure this out later. But in that moment, you need to step out so that you aren't traumatized. And we'll talk about that later too, what that looks like for us. Okay. As much as we want to support and love our partner, our family member, safety is the most important consideration in these situations, because you cannot be a safe person if you yourself are abused, scared, or resentful in the relationship. Know your limits ahead of time. Know when to step out. Let somebody else step in. We'll talk in detail about this at the end of the presentation as well, because I think this is key. So, that's safety. That's our number one thing we're going to do in that moment. Next thing we're going to do is boundaries. So, it is up to us to create reasonable and rational boundaries. People who have experienced trauma often have a very confused sense of boundaries for themselves and others, because their boundaries weren't respected and their lines were crossed with them through abuse, neglect, exploitation. In the past, they may not trust themselves or anybody else in the present. They don't believe you that you're a safe person necessarily. They're going to learn it through consistency over time. So different triggers or situations may even bring out an extreme response. At times, it's very common for people with trauma to waffle between being too close, I love you, I'm your best friend, you're everything to me, and then too distant. I don't know who you are, I don't want to deal with you, you make me mad, right? This back and forth is common. It's a sign that we don't know our boundaries. We don't know where we begin and end. And so we're always dancing around, what do I do, where am I in this relationship, what's happening? They're always guessing. And that creates that push-pull and disorientation for us as we're like, whoa, I thought, okay. So just know that that's common and that's a boundary issue that we're going to work on. So boundaries, they're created by first kind of ahead of time you need to know what they are and consider what are my boundaries, what are my boundaries for this relationship. It's going to be really different if it's a coworker, a child, a parent, your spouse, right? Every relationship we have has its own unique set of boundaries that it's up to us to kind of know ahead of time. Once we kind of understand what those are, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. We can directly talk to that person about the boundaries. This is what I need. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. Just very good assertive communication. Assertive communication says, I respect myself and I respect you. And when we come out of this conversation, both of those goals are going to be intact. That's assertive communication. With a child, this may be clear instructions. I need you to sit down right now, or you're not allowed to go outside, or they're very black and white. Kids are black and white. They're concrete thinkers. With our spouse, we don't generally talk to our spouse that way always. It might be more of feedback. Can I offer you an idea? I'm noticing. It's going to be, the conversation's going to be a little bit, might be a different framework. So what we want to do is explain consequences ahead of time for violated boundaries. We want to make sure we don't skip this step. We don't want to assume they know what's going to happen. They don't know. They don't know what boundaries are. We got to teach it. We got to show it. We want to open up the conversation about the why behind the boundary. I need you to be home by 9 o'clock at night because it makes me really worried when I don't know where you are and I care so much about you. I really want to see you at night, and so it's really important to me that you're home at 9 o'clock. We give a little bit of that explanation. We connect it with ourselves. Ask questions to stimulate thinking. What do you think about that? Does 9 o'clock seem reasonable to you? What would seem reasonable to you? You say 9:30? Well, let's talk about that. So it's okay to kind of negotiate a little bit with the boundaries, but know kind of ahead of time where that negotiation ends and this is the boundary it is, okay? Follow through with what we say. Consistency and accuracy over and over again. That builds trust. Consistency over time. We get a same outcome over and over and over. Trust. Boundaries are one of the kindest gifts you can give to your loved one. However, just because our loved one may push back against our boundaries and say no way, doesn't mean we don't do them. And you will get pushback, right? When we set boundaries that haven't been there before, expect some pushback. Because our loved one, our friend, our coworker, our child, our parent can say, what do you mean you're doing something different in our relationship? I know my role in this dynamic, even if it's kind of miserable. What do you mean you're trying to do something different? Now I'm worried. Yep, we're doing something different. Yep, you might feel a little bit disoriented. That's okay. We're still doing something different. It's still going to be okay. I'm still going to be consistent. Structure and boundaries are absolutely essential to someone who's been through really hard things because that lets them know where they begin and end, which they desperately need to know. And sometimes they push up against that boundary because they're like, is that boundary real? Is it going to fall over or can I trust it? And so they actually might push up against us. They might argue with us. They might try to get around it, right? And it's because they're crying out inside, I hope this boundary is real. I hope this means that there's some structure and some safety. I hope this means that I can trust you. So expect an escalation initially when you put up boundaries. Hold firm, and it'll come back down the other side. And I would guess that it will improve. So part of why we hold boundaries is we're trying to generate motivation for change. So this is really important. I love Viktor Frankl. If you don't know him, he was a Holocaust survivor. He's a psychologist, and he wrote about his experiences, and he wrote a book called The Meaning of Life. Amazing stuff. But one of the things, so in the context of his experience in a Nazi concentration camp, I think this quote means even more. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are then challenged to change ourselves. When the dynamics are no longer working, because now we've got boundaries and we've got safety, then guess what? That person says, maybe I need to do something with myself. Motivation or change is generated. Next. Okay, skill building. Once we've got some safety in place, we've got those structure, that boundaries, now we're ready to kind of move forward into those new ways of thinking, feeling, doing. Skill building. Next. So skill building isn't going to work well unless you've got that foundation in place, because that means I can take new information in. You're safe. I know where we begin and end. Now my brain's ready to say, all right, what do you have to say to me? Most effective and sustainable way for skill building is the day-to-day normal interactions. It's the repetition. Gottman says small things often. It's all those small things that are so important. It's not necessarily the big prize. It's the everyday, how are how's your day? You know, it's all of those little interactions that are gonna build this. Because you're modeling it. You're showing up every day in a healthy way. You're showing what a healthy person looks like and a healthy way to interact. Next. So, a more concrete way to do this, however, is to talk about. So number one, talk about what you're observing. I'm noticing that when your mom came to dinner last night, you seemed really upset and you left the room. Just notice that. Are you okay if we talk about that? What do you think's going on there? So we're addressing it by opening it up and just making an observation. It's not an accusation saying, I can't believe how you handled your mom. She finally comes over to dinner and it didn't even, like, what the heck? Like, why can't you do this? Right? Now we become a threat. We're gentle, we're partnering with them, we're looking at the third party and we're saying, hey, I'm noticing this thing. What do you think? You seeing it too? So we're gonna ask if they are open to feedback or ideas. What do you think? We might want to share a personal experience that's similar and how we work through it. You know, last year when I was having all that trouble with my brother, and we had those family get-togethers, and it was really hard for me to be in the same room with him. You know, I found that it helped when we just share a story about what helped. Talk about your feelings. It was really hard when that happened, and I can understand how confusing and hurtful it must be. Explain your reasoning behind the decisions you made. You know, I had to step out of that relationship with my brother for a while. I had to take space. Process out loud your problem solving around that situation. Every one of these steps is showing that person how to do this, right? And that's, they don't know, they may not have a blueprint for this. They've never considered this before. And so you share your story, you're modeling each step. Ask for their input. What do you think? What do you think I should have done? What does that sound like to you? Gottman's startup, softened startup. It's a great way to frame a conversation about change or a hard thing. It's a great way to start the conversation about conflict. I feel about what I need. You know, I feel a little bit worried when I see you constantly pulling out of the relationship with your mom. I do need us to be a family sometimes and to figure out how we're going to work through this thing out. So there's a gentle way that we're still assertively saying, hey, this matters, and we can talk about it, and it's gentle. And then we really want to praise the good skills and behaviors when we see them and express appreciation. I so appreciated how you were able to answer that text to your mom and just kind of move on with your evening. Thank you so much for being able to handle that. That was great. One other thing I want to say is sometimes with the skill building, we kind of feel like we want to, you know, we're finally having a conversation with our loved one and they're hearing us, and so now we want to tell them everything that we're noticing and watching. So one thing at a time. One thing at a time. This is the skill we're focusing on this week. This is the one thing that if I can support them in this, then we can lead to the next. So kind of be, prioritize what it is you're working on. Okay, reinforcement. Any type of small positive change with our loved one or in the relationship must be celebrated and highlighted. We want to call it out, we want to bring it forward, we want to make it a big deal. That's going to help our loved one obviously want to do it more because they're getting this great response. It also sends a little dopamine to their brain. They have this paired association now with, I did this good thing and I felt good, and you felt good. The brain says, let's do more of that. Reinforcement increases the likelihood it's going to be done again and again. It builds trust and positivity back into the relationship. So what you want to do is you want to describe a specific behavior that you appreciated. I so appreciated that you were home at 5 o'clock last night for dinner. That was so good. I loved seeing you drive up the driveway and knowing that you were home for the night. Thank you so much for doing that. Express the positive or emotion or outcome. Attach it to, I felt good. This made a difference in our relationship. This changed the feel of our home. Again, we're building up that. Only discuss the positive at first. Later we can address the other issues. Now, maybe my partner got home at 5 o'clock, which was amazing, and I was so excited, but they got on their phone and wasted an hour on the couch, didn't actually eat dinner. We'll deal with that later. Right now, they came home at the time I asked them to. That's what we're focusing on. Later, we can open up that conversation about, I feel about what I need, or I'm noticing, what do you think? But in that moment, let it all be about the good thing. Build that up. Okay. Big breath. How are you guys doing? Okay. I get really excited about this stuff. I could talk all day about it. So sometimes you gotta rein me in. Or if you guys need to get some water, get some more food, take a potty break, please feel free to do so. Should we take a minute? Do you guys need a minute? Or okay. All right. Well, we'll keep going then, but please tell me if we need to pause, okay? All right, so the big question I think that's also in the room when we talk about this is, what if we can't live with their trauma, okay? This is the big one. So sometimes we cannot salvage these relationships. We can't fix them. Our best efforts aren't working. This may be due to our own limited resources of time, availability, our own personal emotional skills, or it's the pervasive nature of our loved ones' triggers and the behaviors that make it unsafe for us to keep stepping back into that war zone day after day. We may find that we are spending more time in our own state of trauma and survival. We may realize that we are stuck on step one, safety, not able to get past that step, can't get that safety established, not really working, or we're recognizing as we're actually putting those boundaries in place, our loved one is consistently blowing through them. It's not working. We may be finding ourselves on the defensive and in a survival mode ourselves a lot of the time. These are bad signs. So, when you can't live with their trauma, so we can't be a safe space for people if we ourselves are traumatized. So that's I just gotta put that out there. Like that, walk away with that today. Get help for yourself first. It's okay to pull back from the relationship a little bit. It's okay to step out of the relationship. It's okay to be unable to be the one to help them. You must help yourself first, and then you can circle back to the relationship later if it feels appropriate. But to keep on doing something that's exhausting, that's not benefiting anyone, right? Sometimes we gotta step out, rethink it, come up with a new strategy, and then come back in. However, sometimes we can't even step out of the relationship. It's our child. It's our parents, or it feels like I'm married to this person. Like, how do we do this? How do I step out? So in these situations, we are not without hope, though. There's a lot of different things we can do. And a couple of them I'm going to highlight here is we look for ways that we can emotionally detach from the person, maintain our boundaries, and seek support and growth for ourselves. So those are 3 great things right out of the gates we're going to want to engage with. And these are small, but they can be very powerful acts. By modeling these skills and demonstrating healthy boundaries, again, motivation for change may be generated in our loved one. They feel us pulling back, they recognize that this isn't working, and hopefully something inside of them that says, hey, wait a minute, this isn't quite the outcome I want. And they ask some questions, they get some help for themselves. So motivation for change sometimes happens when we step out and say, I can't. Then that person is left to deal with themselves. That's not a bad space to be, right? That's okay to be like, I can't blame anybody else anymore because everybody stepped out, it's just me. That's where sometimes God can work the best because everybody's out of the way and that person and God can have that face-to-face encounter. Not a bad thing, right? Mm-hmm. We want our loved one to be inspired to try something new, and sometimes we just got to get out of the picture. Next. Okay, so knowing your limits. Here's some key guidelines. These are not necessarily perfect guidelines, but these are some good ones I think that will help you kind of clarify where you're at. Okay, you should step out when you feel abused, scared, or resentful. Those are not good signs. I want to make a little caveat about that. Even in normal relationships, there's times where we're going to feel resentful or we're going to feel scared, right? So again, it's the patterned presence. It's I spend more time feeling scared, resentful, negative, frustrated, hopeless about the relationship than I do feeling good about it. Okay? That's a bad sign. We might have a day now and then where we're like, this is not working, I'm super upset. But, the other 90% of the time, we are in a healthy relationship. It is working, we're making some progress, those boundaries are working, that kind of thing. So if you need some clarification on that, I would say, is it becoming a pattern? Is it becoming more common than not? Okay, when what you're doing is not working, 10 years have passed, and despite my efforts at safety and boundaries and skill building, we're getting nowhere. We might need, the most loving thing we might need to do is to step out of the relationship, right? Reevaluate. Something different needs to happen here. Don't be afraid to make a change. If we really love this person, then we want change, and sometimes that change is uncomfortable, and it's okay to be uncomfortable because that's where we grow. When your own physical and mental health are suffering more days than not, again, if you're feeling stressed so much, if you're feeling hopeless, if you feel like you're in a mild depression because of the situation you're living in, step back out, get some help, reevaluate. And when the relationship is becoming exploitative, when the relationship is becoming about the other person all the time, and they are using you to meet their needs, not a good sign. May have been a dynamic that you supported, and I'm here for you, I love you, I'm supporting you. And after a while, it's like, okay, it's all about them. All I do is support them and hold them up. Their emotions are the most important thing in the room. That's exploitative. Okay? So if you are existing to make them feel good about themselves, not a good sign. Step out. Okay? Really want to talk about this for a sec as well. When to get help. So there's also another line that can be crossed, and that's with physical abuse, physical or sexual abuse. If you're being physically abused in this relationship in any way, you must get out of the relationship with the help of others. If you are staying in the relationship for the sake of your children or other family members, know that you will serve them vastly better by modeling safe boundaries and a healthy way to live. I know that might be a hard thing to hear, and I understand that, and I totally get it. And I also am not apologizing in this. You must get help for yourself. You are not serving your loved one by letting them be an abusive person day after day. They are not their best selves.
Right.
They are not growing. They are not changing. If we love them, we want better for them. Even if we don't know how we feel about ourselves, because sometimes we get that way in relationships after a while. We don't know who we are. We don't know how we feel. And we're just existing to take care of everybody around us. I want to say, if you want to take care of people around you, you get out of that relationship and you make some changes. And it's incredibly hard, and it feels impossible at times. But you are not alone in this. And I want to just throw that out there, that God is with you. And because God is so good, He has provided resources in our community, in our church, in our relationships around us that I'm going to encourage you to connect with. I highlighted 3 up here that are really good, that I worked with all of these and found them to be very useful. These are local Latah County resources. Alternatives to Violence of the Palouse. Wonderful organization. You can give them a call and be anonymous and say, hey, can I just talk to somebody about some things? And they'll chat with you. You can ask them questions. You can just feel out what your options are. Nobody has to know who you are. If you do decide that you want to really make some changes, they have financial resources to help you. They can walk you through legal issues. They can just give you that kind support, maybe just a listening ear. They're very respectful. Rural Crisis Network. These people are wonderful. They have a center right downtown next to Latah Recovery Center. They share the same website, but they're actually different entities. They do triage. I send people there all the time. I love these people here. You can just show up. They're a 24/7 kind of center. And you can just say, I need help. I'm in a crisis. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure. And they are confidential. They will walk you through what can we do to help you. They have trained clinical staff that can come in and be with you as well. So if you're kind of lost, or if you're in a crisis where maybe an incident happened and you can't go home, or go there. That's a great idea. And then the Idaho Council on Domestic Violence on their website, they have some really good information about financial assistance for victims. And all kinds of different resources on there that you may not even be aware you can access. So, wanted to highlight this. Sometimes these relationships we're in are really hard and we do need to step out, but you don't have to do it alone. Also want to say I'm going to be here after we do the Q&A. If you want to talk about anything or need some next steps, I'm happy to help with anything like that as well and kind of point you to some directions in our community. Okay, next, in summary, the way we live with someone else's trauma is going to be through compassion, strategy, and discernment. We're going to enact our safety. We're going to put in some boundaries. We're going to call them to a higher standard through skill building. And then we're going to reinforce it so it sticks and it stays over time. And while we do all of this, we're going to know our limits. And we're going to be totally okay stepping back, reevaluating, and stepping back in. And we might do that multiple times in the relationship. Each relationship is unique. So we're kind of making this broad, right? We're talking about kids. We're talking about parents, people we're married to, people we're dating, people we work with closely in an office. Each one's unique. So assess your situation with curiosity and honesty. Ask some questions. What is going on here? Is this bad behavior? Is this maybe trauma? Get curious. Try to see if you can externalize the problem as something outside of the relationship. If I were to put a name to this, what would this be? If I were to stop saying it's you and being angry at you, and if I could name it, what would I call it? Educate yourself. I'm going to encourage you to do exactly what you're doing today, coming to things like this. Read books, listen to podcasts. Educate yourself on relationships. Educate yourself on yourself. Why are you in this relationship? What attracted you to it? Sometimes our own trauma leads us into a relationship with someone with trauma. That's a whole other talk. Know your resources and use them. And then one of my favorite lines is, hope equals a credible plan. When we see a couple of concrete steps in front of us, hope, right? I can do something different. That was my goal for you today, is that you walk out of here with a couple of steps, a couple of ideas you maybe didn't have before about how to navigate these troubled relationships so that we can get to the other side and we can get through it. We can be resilient in our relationships. And it can become a part of a bigger story that we get to share of success and triumph. Because there is hope, and there's always something around the corner. Maybe we haven't tried yet or thought about. I just encourage you to stay curious and stay engaged. Thank you.